The cold metal of the handcuffs was a shocking contrast to the warmth of the spring afternoon. One moment, Clara Thornton was admiring the blooming petunias in the public garden, her hands still faintly dusted with the rich soil from her own flower beds at home. The next, a shadow fell over her, dense and unwelcome. Officer Finch, a man whose uniform seemed a size too small for his ego, wrenched her arms behind her back with a practiced impersonal roughness. The click of the cuffs was unnervingly loud in the quiet street, a sound that sliced through the peaceful murmur of the city. He saw a woman in a simple linen dress, her hair tied back in a practical, unadorned knot. He saw worn gardening shoes, and a face that, while possessing a certain placid beauty, was unadorned with makeup. He saw someone insignificant, a piece of urban flotsam to be swept aside. His partner, Officer Becker, younger and more hesitant, stood by. His expression, a mixture of duty and a faint, quickly suppressed unease. He held a tablet displaying a grainy image of a wanted shoplifter, a woman who shared Clara's hair color, in general height, but whose face was harder, etched with a life Clara couldn't imagine. The resemblance was a phantom, a flimsy excuse for the certainty with which Finch was acting. "All right, ma'am, let's go. You've led us on quite a chase," Finch said, his voice dripping with a condescending authority. Clara didn't struggle. She didn't raise her voice. She stood with a stillness that seemed to unnerve him more than any protest would have. Her heart was beating a frantic, terrified rhythm against her ribs, but her face remained a mask of calm composure. "Officer," she began, her voice steady and clear, "there has been a profound misunderstanding." Finch chuckled, a short, ugly sound. "That's what they all say. Just save it for the judge." He tugged her towards the patrol car, the metal of the cuffs digging into her wrists. A small crowd of silent witnesses was beginning to form, their faces a gallery of curiosity and mild alarm. They were onlookers, observers to a small, everyday drama, unaware of the tectonic shift that was about to occur. It's stories like this, where the overlooked find their voice and the arrogant meet their reckoning, that remind us of the power of unseen truths. If you believe in justice and the strength of the human spirit, subscribe to our channel and like this video, because you won't want to miss how this ends. From the doorway of his antique bookshop, an elderly man named Arthur Albright watched, his brow furrowed with concern. Her heart was beating a frantic, terrified rhythm against her ribs, but her face remained a mask of calm composure.
"Officer,"
she began, her voice steady and clear, "there has been a profound misunderstanding." Finch chuckled, a short, ugly sound. "That's what they all say. Just save it for the judge." He tugged her towards the patrol car, the metal of the cuffs digging into her wrists. A small crowd of silent witnesses was beginning to form, their faces a gallery of curiosity and mild alarm. They were onlookers, observers to a small, everyday drama, unaware of the tectonic shift that was about to occur. It's stories like this, where the overlooked find their voice and the arrogant meet their reckoning, that remind us of the power of unseen truths. If you believe in justice and the strength of the human spirit, subscribe to our channel and like this video, because you won't want to miss how this ends. From the doorway of his antique bookshop, an elderly man named Arthur Albright watched, his brow furrowed with concern. He saw her composure, her quiet dignity, and mistook it for cunning. He saw weakness where there was immeasurable strength. He saw nobody, when in fact he had just arrested the calm, quiet center of a very powerful man's universe. And in doing so, he had just sealed his own fate. The police precinct was a monument to institutional indifference. The air hung thick with the ghosts of 1,000 desperate stories, smelling of stale coffee, antiseptic, and low-grade despair. The walls were a sickly shade of beige, scuffed and marked by the passage of countless bodies. For Clara, the transition from the sunlit garden to this sterile, echoing chamber was jarring, yet her outward demeanor remained unchanged. She sat on a hard plastic chair, her cuffed hands resting in her lap, her gaze fixed on a crack in the linoleum floor. She was an island of tranquility in a sea of bureaucratic noise. Officer Finch, however, seemed to draw energy from the environment. He swaggered through the booking process, his voice unnecessarily loud as he read out the trumped-up charges. Jane Doe, suspected of multiple counts of retail theft, resisting. Well, let's call it non-compliance. He looked at Clara, a goading smirk on his face. Got anything to say for yourself now? Clara looked up, her eyes meeting his directly. The look was not one of fear or anger, but of a deep, unsettling clarity, as if she were seeing right through his bluster to the insecure man beneath. My name is Clara Thornton, she said, her voice soft but unwavering. And I am innocent. The simplicity of her statement seemed to infuriate Finch more than any complex legal argument would have. It lacked the fear he expected, the deference he felt he was owed. He slammed a file down on the counter. Right, Clara Thornton? We'll see about that. He gestured to Becker. Get her prints. And check this simple little ring of hers. Probably fake, but run it anyway. Becker approached hesitantly. He took Clara's hands, his touch surprisingly gentle as he guided her fingers onto the ink pad and then the paper. He avoided her eyes, his own shame, a palpable force. When he examined the simple, elegant gold band on her finger, he saw a small, almost invisible inscription on the inside. He didn't read it. He didn't want to know. It was just a passenger in Finch's runaway vehicle of arrogance, and he was starting to fear the inevitable crash. An hour later, Clara was placed in a small, cold holding cell. The steel bench was unforgiving, the air stale, yet she did not weep. She did not pace. She sat, her back straight, and entered a state of quiet meditation, a practice her husband had taught her to find peace in chaos. She thought of him, of his unwavering moral compass, of the quiet strength that mirrored her own. She knew he would be worried, but she also knew he would not panic. He would be methodical. He would be just. The injustice of her situation was a heavy weight, but it was a burden she could carry because she was not carrying it alone. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Officer Finch appeared at the bars of her cell, dangling a key. Oh, Clara. Thornton, your prints didn't match our shoplifter. Lucky you. But we're holding you for 24 hours for noncompliance and obstructing an investigation. You get one phone call. He opened the door with a flourish, his tone mocking. Go on. Call someone to cry too. Maybe they can bring you a sweater. Clara walked past him without a word, her dignity an invisible shield he could not penetrate. She was led to a phone bolted to the wall in the booking area. She picked up the receiver, the plastic cool against her skin. She didn't need to look up a number. She dialed the 7 digits from memory, a number as familiar to her as her own name. Finch and Becker watched, leaning against a desk, expecting a tearful, frantic plea. The phone was answered on the second ring. Clara's voice was low and calm, devoid of panic. Julian, she said, it's me. There was a pause as she listened. I'm all right. There has been a situation. I am at the downtown precinct on Elm Street. She listened again, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. Yes, I know. I'm sorry to interrupt your meeting. The arresting officers are Finch and Becker. She gave a brief, factual account of the events, her tone that of a witness reporting an incident, not a victim crying for help. I will be here, she concluded. I love you too. She placed the receiver back in its cradle with a gentle click. Finch let out a laugh. Julian? Is Julian going to come down here and sort us all out? Becker, however, did not laugh. He had heard the name. And while the name Julian was common, there was a specific Julian in the city's command structure, whose last name he desperately hoped was not Thornton. He looked at Clara, truly looked at her for the first time, and saw not a suspect, but a woman of immense, formidable composure. A sudden cold dread began to pool in his stomach. The clock on the wall ticked. The sounds of the precinct continued, unabated. But for Officer Becker, the entire world had just gone silent, waiting for a storm he now felt certain was about to break over all of their heads. The arrival was not dramatic in the way of screeching tires or flashing lights. It was something far more intimidating. A single, dark sedan, a model favored by government officials for its understated authority, pulled smoothly into the designated parking for senior staff. It was immaculately clean, a a stark contrast to the grime-streaked patrol cars surrounding it. The man who emerged was tall and moved with an economy of motion that spoke of years of discipline. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, but it was his posture, straight and unyielding as a steel rod, that commanded attention. This was Julian Thornton. He was not a general anymore, not in uniform, but the air of command clung to him like a second skin. As he walked towards the entrance of the precinct, his polished leather shoes made no sound on the pavement, but his presence seemed to precede him, sending ripples of unease through the very air. The desk sergeant, a portly, complacent man named Murphy, was in the middle of a complaint about the station's coffee machine when Julian Thornton walked in. Murphy looked up, annoyed at the interruption, his mouth half open to deliver a standard, dismissive greeting. The words died in his throat. He didn't know Julian Thornton personally, but he had seen the official portrait that hung in the lobby of the central headquarters. He was the civilian commissioner, the ultimate oversight for the entire department, a man known for his razor-sharp intellect and absolute intolerance for misconduct. Murphy's face went from ruddy to a pasty white, shot to his feet, knocking his chair back. "Commissioner Thornton. Sir, we had no idea you were." Julian raised a hand, a simple gesture that cut through the sergeant's flustered babble. His voice was quiet, yet it carried across the entire booking area, a blade of ice that silenced every other sound. "Sergeant, I am here for my wife." The words hung in the air, heavy and laden with meaning. "Her name is Clara Thornton. I am told she is being held here by an Officer Finch and an Officer Becker." The name Thornton, spoken by the commissioner himself in relation to a woman in their holding cell, landed like a grenade. Murphy looked as if he had been physically struck. He'd fumbled with his radio, his hands shaking. "You arrested my wife in the public garden on Abernathy Street approximately 2 hours ago. You accused her of being a common thief. You mocked her. You dismissed a citizen who tried to vouch for her character, and you put her in a cell. You took a small step forward. I would like to see your body camera footage, every second of it. I would also like to see the incident report you filed. The precinct captain has been notified of my arrival. He is on his way. We will all review it together." It was not a request. It was an order, delivered with the finality of a death sentence. Finch opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was staring at the architect of his own ruin. The entire situation had been inverted. He, the man with the badge and the gun, was now the one who was powerless, judged, and found wanting. He looked from Julian's unyielding face to Clara, who was now being escorted out of the holding area by a stammering, apologetic Sergeant Murphy. She looked at Finch not with triumph, not with malice, but with a quiet, sorrowful disappointment. And in that moment, Finch understood. He had not arrested a criminal. He had committed professional suicide. The precinct captain, a harried man named Evans, arrived in a flurry of apologies and panicked deference. He ushered Commissioner Thornton and Clara into his private office, a room that suddenly felt far too small and confining. Finch and Becker were told to wait outside, standing stiffly in the hallway like errant schoolboys awaiting the headmaster's wrath. The silence in the captain's office was thick and heavy as the body camera footage played on a large monitor. Julian Thornton stood behind the captain's desk, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable but radiating a chilling intensity. Clara sat in a chair beside him, watching the screen not as a victim reliving trauma, but as a calm observer of fact. The footage was damning. Finch's voice, amplified by the small speaker, filled the room with its own arrogant poison. Every condescending remark, every sneer, the rough handling. The dismissal of Arthur the bookseller was all there, captured. In stark, undeniable detail, the camera captured Clara's quiet dignity, her unwavering, simple statements of innocence, which now in this context sounded like clarion calls of truth against a backdrop of ignorant hostility. When the footage showed Finch mocking her husband, "Julian must be a real winner," Captain Evans physically flinched and sank lower in his chair, wishing the floor would swallow him whole. When the video ended, there was a profound silence. Julian Thornton let the weight of it settle in the room. Before he spoke, his voice was still quiet, but but it was edged with the cold fury of a deeply moral man who has witnessed a profound transgression. "Captain," he began, "what I have just witnessed is not just a mistake. It is a failure of character, a perversion of authority, and an insult to the badge that every good officer in this city wears with honor." He turned his gaze to Clara, his expression softening for the first time. He gently took her hand, the one still bearing a faint red mark from the handcuffs. "This woman," he said, his voice now resonating with a deep, protective love, "spends her time volunteering at the city library, tending to a community garden that feeds the homeless, and looking after the elderly on her street. She is the very definition of the citizen you are sworn to protect, and your men treated her like refuse." He turned back to the captain. "Their actions were not a response to a threat. They were an exercise in bullying, based on nothing more than the simplicity of her dress and the quietness of her spirit." Captain Evans could only nod, his face ashen. "Commissioner, I am appalled. There are no excuses. I will personally see that." Julian held up his hand again. "You will do more than that, Captain. You will open a full internal affairs investigation. You will take their badges and their service weapons, pending termination. You will issue a formal public apology to my wife and to the gentleman they threatened, Mr. Arthur Albright. And you will use this as a teachable moment for every officer in this precinct on the dangers of arrogance and the poison of prejudice." He then walked to the door and opened it, looking directly at the two pale-faced officers outside. "Officers Finch and Becker," he said, his voice carrying clearly down the hall. "You are relieved of duty. You have disgraced yourselves and this department. Your careers in law enforcement are over."
Ow.
Finch finally broke, a desperate, pathetic sound escaping his lips. "Sir, please." It was a misunderstanding. But Julian Thornton had already turned away. He placed a protective arm around Clara's shoulders and guided her out of the office. They walked through the precinct, a silent, powerful procession of two. The other officers averted their eyes, a palpable sense of shame hanging over the entire station. As they stepped out into the fresh air, the afternoon sun felt like a benediction. They did not get into the official sedan. Instead, they simply began to walk, hand in hand, down the street towards the public garden. The story spread through the city like wildfire, a modern-day fable of hubris and humility. Finch and Becker were fired, their downfall a stark warning against the abuse of power. Arthur Albright became a minor local celebrity, his simple act of courage celebrated. But for Clara and Julian Thornton, life returned to its quiet rhythm. The true victory was not in the punishment of two men, but in the reaffirmation of a simple, profound truth, that true worth is not measured by titles or uniforms or the volume of one's voice, but by the silent, steady strength of one's character. And in the end, character is all that remains.